And welcome back to afternoon on March 14th. Hoping to finish up in the next few hours and probably good for everyone if we do. So we're going to go back to H80 and we've made some changes. We're going to have Legislative Council walk us through that.
All right. Good afternoon, Jen Kirby from the Office of Legislative Counsel. So I have for you an amendment that is not a strike all amendment. It's two instances of amendment, because these are the two pieces I have typically heard about and was asked to change. So the first one, so we're in H80, which is an act relating to the Office of Healthcare Advocate. The first change is in Section 1, which is 8 VSA, Section 4062, the health insurance rate review statute. And this would just replace one part of the bill. And I've marked it up here so you could see, but it wouldn't have the highlighting or the bold. So this is the language about when the Office of the Healthcare Advocate can submit to the board questions about the filing. My understanding is that the parties had agreed on, instead of questions regarding the filing, that it would be questions with an articulable nexus to the filing.
In English, please.
I will say that there were some parties that were concerned with the language, and I asked for all the parties to come together to come up with language that they were all agreeable to. And this beautiful language is what they came up with.
To the best of my research ability, this language appears to come mainly out of New York corporate jurisdiction law, for what it's worth. I might recommend other phrasing, but this seems to be the phrasing that the parties have agreed to. I would suggest something more like reasonably related to the filing, but recognize there could be perhaps some difference between what is reasonably related and what it has an articulable nexus. I don't know. It's not a term that is used in Vermont law currently.
For some of us who might be challenged in our vocabulary, could you explain to us what
an articulable nexus is? Yes. I mean, articulable meaning something that can be put into words. Nexus being a connection. So a connection that can be explained.
Alan?
It's a descriptive adjective. I'm going to do something for Art. With my pea-sized brain, I do not like this. I like your idea.
Reasonably related.
Yes. So.
Leslie.
So in our conversation, it was relevant. We used the word relevant as in place of reasonable. And I'm sure that there were discussions
Relevant to the filing. Yep.
Yeah.
I think that would work too.
So, yeah, I mean, I think this is not necessarily accessible to the average person. It's my concern.
I don't disagree.
Yeah.
You don't. Plus, if I have to read it, I don't have to say that word articulate.
Jen, can you repeat I had my hand raised, but everyone else
Yeah,
is talking. Jen, can you repeat the language that you had mentioned earlier?
I suggested something more like reasonably related to the filing. It sounds like I do think the committee has talked about questions that are relevant to the filing.
Because I looked up what nexus means, and it says a connection or the central or most important point of a place. The nexus of all this activity was the disco. I love that.
I saw that too.
But the connection, so I think like even if you said reasonably related, but even if we said like an articulable connection or something connection, it would be better than nexus. And they're literally the same word, because most people in like I think of like an interdimensional portal.
Yeah,
You know, so anyway, so I mean, maybe we could, even if it's like a reasonable connection or something.
Articulable connection.
I would like to have perhaps the healthcare advocate speak to the conversations and the arrangement over this language.
Mike Fisher, Health Council. So I am not at all surprised by the conversation that's happening around the committee. But I'm a part of 3 parties that got together and talked about finding an agreement. That is Blue Cross, MVP, and the healthcare advocate. And this was the language that was landed on. So the committee can obviously do what could. It is your bill, you are the legislator, you get to vote. But this was the agreement, and so. Doing my part as a part of that threesome to support this language.
And you support this language. And was there discussion over other options for language, which include what our legislative council?
There was discussion about a lot of different options. This is the one that was landed on. I don't know what else to say.
Daisy?
I'm perfectly fine with this language myself. I understand it, and I think the most important thing is that the stakeholders understand it, because I don't think that the general public commonly refers to statute. And I think we need to craft policy that is useful to the people who are most impacted and will be referring to it, and that's the people that designs the language.
My only cautionary on that is I don't believe the board was part of that conversation, so I don't know if they have a position on the language, but it is sort of up to the board's determination of when there is an articulable nexus.
Board is here. I'm wondering if the board would like to make a comment, or would the board need time to comment?
For the record, Diane Langford, Green Mountain Care Board. I don't have background on this, but I would make an executive decision right now and say that if all the parties have come together, that this is the language, I'm sure we could make this work. At this point, I don't think I'd want to be in the way.
Brian?
Yeah, I could support this if it's the only option, but I also think replacing nexus with connection and leaving articulable would satisfy the representative from Enosburg. Right? Enosburg, yes. And not really change the meaning, because nexus is connection. So it would just be like using a synonym for a word that means the same thing. We could also ask the stakeholders quickly to weigh in on it before we vote in an hour.
Unfortunately, one of our stakeholders has to be in a different committee, but we do have representation for one of them or another one. If you'd like to weigh in, Claire.
Sure, and I would say Claire Buckley for MVP. And I would, agree with the healthcare advocate that, this was an agreement by the parties. And therefore MVP would like to support this and thinks that it's workable and would propose to stick with it.
Madam Chair.
Yes,
One more
and
thought.
then Leslie.
No, I pointed to him.
One more thought. That we could hear some direction from the committee to continue working on the language on the Senate side.
Thank you. I was just about to suggest, I understand what both of these words mean. I think it does what we're trying to do. They may be unusual words that we don't normally use, but it's my suggestion that in the interest of bringing all the parties together and having common agreement that we agree with this language, and then perhaps they can all get together and come up with other agreeable language and present it to the Senate. Alan? Did you wanna?
Oh, I like it. But I can be outvoted, so. I don't, we'll probably never use that word again. So I'd like to keep it simple and where everybody can understand it and knows what it means. And I don't think too many people are gonna get this.
Brian?
Yeah, I guess I don't understand. I guess I understand that these parties came together and made an agreement, but what I don't, and I understand that they don't want to undermine each other. But if we have 2 out of the 3 people here couldn't we ask them individually, is connection okay instead of nexus? And if 2 out of 3 said yes, then the majority of the stakeholders were okay with replacing a word with a synonym of the original word. And then if that's a problem, the Senate could fix it. But it's like kind of kicking the can down the road to just say, we're not gonna let the Senate figure it out when a member of the committee has a concern about the language.
I'm not willing at this point to change it to connection. Without all parties having the ability to discuss it amongst themselves. Can I offer that we move on with the rest of the bill and we come back to this? And if at that point, there's consensus among the committee that they do not wish to move forward with this, then we can talk about it at that time.
Sounds good to me.
I think it would be helpful if the parties are going to continue to think about it while we're moving on, to understand what it is that they believe this language, what types of questions would or would not be permissible under this language that would be different from using a phrase like relevant or even the articulable connection or reasonably related or something. It seems like somebody believes there's a line that gets crossed if you go to one of those words, and I don't know how we are supposed to understand kind of where that line is.
Okay, then can I ask the parties that hopefully are listening in and the parties that are in the room, if they could maybe get together and discuss in the next hour?
So I'm sorry, without Blue Cross?
I'm
It
hoping
should
that,
be pretty soon, right? I think that.
I'm just saying, without
I
Blue Cross.
was,
it's
I was
hard
going
for us
to, I was going to give time for Blue Cross to,
And so the question is whether we could change from the word nexus to the word connection.
I mean, I think that's one of the questions. I don't know how people feel about that change, but I think sort of more fundamentally, what is the magic of this phrase to that group that makes that phrase draw a distinction between the types of questions that are okay and the types of questions that are not okay that we couldn't achieve through some other use of more commonly known terms.
or reasonably related is also on the table.
Right. Reasonably related, relevant. What makes it different to say articulable nexus that?
Okay, let's move on with the rest of, so, oh, I'm sorry, Diane.
Madam Chair, Diane Lang from Green Mountain Care Board, that you might hear the hesitation in our voices and why can't like 3 people in the room make a decision? Because we're not in here alone. And there's legal teams from behind every word of that needs to be crafted and thought about and vetted and come back. And I just wanted you to be aware that it isn't as nice and simple as us just going in the hall and deciding. We have to consult with several as well, which takes time in today's crossover. So I would too appreciate it if we could allow the time to work on it in the Senate.
I appreciate that transparent explanation.
Actually, I think it does does the committee, because this is our bill here, not anyone else's, does the committee like reasonably related? Does anyone not like reasonably related?
Can I say something else?
I'd like to say something else too.
I think we should stick with what
Yeah, I agree.
the stakeholders agreed to on this bill.
I'm having an
It-
sorry.
Lori, continue, please.
They came together, they agreed to a statement that works for them. And again, I hate to say it, but if it needs to be fixed, it can be fixed in the Senate. We do that a lot. We say that. It happens. We're at the last day of crossover.
I'm gonna table discussion on this particular thing, and we will come back to it when we get through the rest of the bill. And then we'll come back to this.
There's just one other instance of amendment, which is in section 3, which is the whole healthcare advocate chapter. In section 9604, that's the part about cooperation with cooperation of public agencies. And this would add some additional language around the access to confidential and proprietary information. This is based on some suggestions that the Agency of Human Services, actually John's brought to you the other day, and she and I have been continuing to talk about it. And so the suggested language here is just to add on to the language that's in the bill. So in the bill already, it says when appropriate, state agencies shall allow the office to access confidential or proprietary information that is otherwise exempt from public inspection and copying under the Public Records Act, and to participate in meetings, deliberations, and proceedings in which confidential or proprietary information is discussed. This would add, provided, however, that nothing in this section shall require a state agency to provide or disclose information that is prohibited from disclosure by state or federal law, or that would cause the provider or disclosure to violate any statutory or common law privilege.
Anybody have any questions around that? Okay,
And I will just say the Office of Healthcare Advocate saw this when you all saw this, so they, this is new to
our advocate. Approve. Looks good. Okay. Back to the other language. And the only reason I'm not saying this is because I cannot say articulable. Anyways.
That's one of my reasons.
I know, but it does, you know, I'm not going to be the one reading this statute and interpreting it. It's going to be other people.
I would say my main concern with it is just that it is not a standard in Vermont law. It is something from New York law. It is something from a different context in New York law about when laws apply to a corporation domiciled outside of the state. It is part of their long arm jurisdiction law. It doesn't mean it doesn't work here as a phrase. But when I researched to try to come up with, is there a legal meaning to this and is it in Vermont case law? The only Vermont case I found was a US District Court case citing a New York case that was talking about their law. And typically when they talk about it, they use another phrase similar to reasonably related. I want to remind myself what that is along with it. Again, you can choose and the parties have given you their perspective. I'm giving you mine.
Leslie?
I'd like to support this language too. I think we need to move on, and I'm gonna trust the Senate is gonna fix this because this is not really accessible. I mean, I don't know how many of us had to look up Nexus. I mean, I know what Nexus means, but in this case, anyway, I would like us to pass it today, hopefully, and feel comfortable with that, and then ask the Senate to rephrase. Council.
Brian?
So I mean, now, after hearing what Ledge Counsel said, I did look up articulable nexus as a phrase, and what I found is actually way more complicated. Because it says that it refers to a clear and demonstrable connection or link between a defendant's actions or activities and a specific legal claim or cause of action, often used in determining personal jurisdiction. And that there has to be a it would say an articulable nexus would signify that there's a discernible and understandable relationship between a defendant's conduct and the legal issue at hand. So this
Well, that's right. That's the context that it's used in New York law.
Yeah, so it definitely complicates what does it really mean, for sure, because now I'm not gonna like hold this up, but I'm just saying like that is a big, you can't just replace nexus with connection and have it mean that. So if it has to mean that for some reason, then we can't change it. But if it doesn't have to mean that, and that's just a word that, if it could just be an articulable connection, then we can change nexus to connection. But it does complicate my opinion.
It won't mean that in this context.
Right. I mean, you can't use the description that I believe that the member is looking at is talking about the application of the New York law. So it doesn't, so the phrase articulable nexus by itself does not implicate defendants or personal jurisdiction.
It's just the way it's used in New York law.
Right.
It gives 3 examples, like, so I don't know if these are from New York. One is called long arm statutes.
Yep, this is about.
Yeah, the other is obstruction of justice cases. And the other one is in taxation cases. For example, it's sales tax. A business must have a certain level of activity or nexus within a state before that state can tax the business's sales.
Absurd.
So it does, so another just phrase to give you that is often used along with it in the personal jurisdiction by non-domiciliaries in New York law is substantial relationship. And they talk about
Yeah.
the test is whether an articulable nexus or substantial relationship exists, and that's, you know, between a business transaction and something else, but that would be another option.
Daisy, did you have a question?
Not a question, but just a comment that I don't feel that piecing apart those two words is really relevant to use the magic word to this bill. I don't want to talk about New York law right now. I want to talk about supporting the experts and the stakeholders that helped us craft this bill. And we're not doing that right now. I feel like we're getting a little left field. We have other legislation to pass before crossover. These are the final hours of crossover. And I'm happy to work, as more than half the committee has already suggested, with our counterparts in the Senate, if they feel like there needs to be a language change. I do not.
Mark,
I'd like to move on.
okay.
Can I ask a question? Can I ask the parties that were involved, the three parties, two of them were here, I believe, how they come up with this phrase? We just talked about reasonably.
Can we call the question? That's, if you'd like to move on.
I don't think we can do that in
No.
committee.
I know, I'd like to answer Alan's question.
Yeah.
Can,
So as the Green Mountain Care Board said, we are the people in front of you are not the people, you know, like there were other people brought into the conversation. I can say confidently, the three of us here in the committee, that I'm not at all surprised that the language is awkward at best. Let me just say, it is the general counsel at the Green Mountain Care Board who needs to interpret this, nobody else. I mean, we need to make arguments about it, but I honestly don't think it matters that much. And I also want to say, can I just take a moment to recognize there is another area of the bill that there is a request that we work on over in the Senate that from AHS around that I'm not going to do right now, that we have agreed that we'll work on around when the administration has to consult with the Healthcare Advocates Office. But I appreciate the conversation and we hear you loud and clear and they should give you a final discussion.
Topper?
When this language was developed, did you run it by the lawyer in the legal aid or your lawyer? You did?
Yeah.
And your lawyer said it was okay?
It should not surprise you that it was the lawyers who came up.
Yeah,
with this.
okay.
That's what scares me.
I'm okay.
So I should say, these two changes that I made were ones that had been I've been specifically asked to make. I do know there were other recommendations from the Agency of Human Services. If there are other changes you want me to make, I'm happy to do that.
I think I'm going to decline that offer. I would like to move this bill forward. It is imperfect and, but we have to remember what it is we're trying to accomplish here. And there is another body, and I can guarantee you that when this bill goes to the Senate, I will be speaking to the chair of the committee that it goes to indicate our confusion, displeasure around this language. And in hopes that they will come up with a compromise and that the parties will work together with the lawyers to come up with a compromise. Is this, may I ask, is this language give hesitancy to anyone's support of the greater bill at this time? Because I do think it's a very important bill. And I don't think we should lose sight of that over two words. Brian?
I'm gonna support it, but I do so with hesitation. Because I feel like we might, if we're gonna leave a person behind in the process because we're rushing, that's not really how I like things to be done. But I'm gonna vote yes with that objection on the record, because I do think it's that important that this move forward. Otherwise, I would have voted no if Penny was gonna vote no, because I feel bad leaving him behind. But
I support the whole bill, but I want to be on record that I do not support this line. I think it's an important bill. I have no problem with it, but it just doesn't make sense to me to use something that a lot of people don't even understand, and we could use other words to accomplish the same thing. I will support the bill.
Thank you. All right. Any other discussion around the bill? Other than those two words? Okay, great. I would entertain a motion. That we approve.
it's a draft number.
Oh, we have to amend it. We have
amended.
to- oh, it's amended.
Take a straw, we take a straw poll to approve the amendments to H80.
What's the draft number though?
Mm.
Because I would like to know.
It'll just 1.1, but I'm gonna take out the highlighting.
Okay.
All those in favor? Okay, 10-0-1.
Okay. I move that House Healthcare approve H80 version
It's just as introduced with it's amended, so
as amended. Yeah, that's it, an act relating to the Office of the Healthcare.
The clerk can call the roll.
Brian Gina, Representative Gina,
That's right. Yes.
Representative Cordes, yes. Representative Critchlow.
Yes.
Representative Demar.
Yes.
Representative Goldman.
Yes.
Representative Houghton.
Yes.
Representative Page. Representative Powers.
Yes.
Representative Rebecca.
Yes.
Representative McFawn.
Yes.
Representative Black.
Yes.
Motion passes 10-0. And Representative Black will report.
No. No, because I can't pronounce it. I would like Representative Critchlow to report this bill.
Meanwhile, I'll practice my vocabulary.
You better know what a nexus is. Okay.
I'm gonna have.
You have to get someone else to ask it for you, Penny. I mean, Donahue to ask.
Okay. Right, can we actually just take like a 2